Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Edmund Burke was once the chief of the British Fiscal Authority, said that, quote, "To tax and to please, no more than to love and to be wise, is not given to man." And I think he was right, but I would add a comment on his quote. The comment is that direct taxes are more unpleasant than indirect taxes. In fact, in the 17th century, a book called The Gold Mine of Consumption Taxes was written, stating that whenever a government wanted to get money out of his citizens, it should opt for consumption taxes, because this way their citizens would pay the taxes without knowing, without realizing how much they were paying, they were carrying from their pockets to the government. And this is important to explain why I have chosen this topic here today. In Brazil, 60% of the tax revenue on all levels, federal, state, and municipal, come from consumption taxes. In Brazil, we have 3 federal value-added taxes, 1 state value-added tax, and 1 municipal cascading tax on services. And I've learned yesterday with my friend Leila that in Turkish, this number is even higher. 70% of the Turkish total tax collection comes from consumption taxes. That is why the right to deduct input VAT, consider that VAT is used in more than 140 countries and 75% of the world's population pay VAT, is an important issue nowadays in tax law. And the proposal of this lecture is to establish a connection between human rights, the right to deduct input VAT, and taxation, therefore. But to do that, we have to go one step back to when VAT was originally conceived, was created. VAT is the successor of the old turnover multi-phase tax or cascading tax. Tax that is levied in each stage of the production chain and therefore makes the tax burden higher as long as we have more taxable transactions from the production until the final sale to the consumer. In medieval Spain, there was a consumption tax, a cascading tax called the alcabala, with rates that went up higher to 10%. And Adam Smith, when analyzing the reasons for the economic decline of the Spanish Empire, and I'm not referring to the decline of the Spanish soccer team, already happened yesterday in Brazil. The decline of the Spanish Empire is credited by Adam Smith, one of the main reasons, to the alcabala. But why is that? Because whenever you charge a consumption tax in each taxable transaction, and this consumption tax makes the good or the service more expensive as far as we have more taxable transactions from the production until the final sale, we are laboring against the free organization of the market. We are favoring large enterprises, and we are not looking for small and medium businesses. As long as a big industry can, if it organizes itself to do it, sell its good to the final consumer, the small business, the medium business will necessarily have to buy the good from at least the industry or the wholesaler and then sell it to the final consumer, therefore suffering a higher tax burden on its receipts in comparison to larger companies. And this type of taxation also brings a tax discrimination against goods that are produced within the country. Because the normal chain of supply encompass at least 2 or 3 taxable transactions before the goods arrives to the final consumer. Let's say the industry, the wholesaler, and the retailer, 3 times. But if the final consumer imports the goods directly, it will pay the consumption tax only once at customs clearance, therefore facing a lower tax burden whenever buying that imported good. To these problems, we can add up the lack of transparency, since we don't know exactly the burden of the tax in each service or good, and an incentive to tax evasion, since that, contrary to what happens in VAT, the taxable person, the business, has no incentive to ask for an invoice whenever acquiring goods or services, because he won't be able to use that, the price stated in that invoice, the tax that is put in that invoice, to deduct from his sales tax due. Therefore, in the beginning of the 20th century, and in a moment where Europe was in need of economic development because it had faced 2 world wars and it was in need of maintaining the tax revenue, but at the same time fostering economic development, the value-added tax is created. And the value-added tax, therefore, is conceived as a solution for economic development aligned to fiscal revenue, to the collection of tax in a way that the state can pay its bills. And what was the main characteristic of VAT that differs it from the old cascading tax? Well, the right to deduct. Anytime a business buys goods or services that are used in its taxable operations, it has the right to deduct input VAT. Of course, if personal goods are bought, then the business or the taxable person won't be able to deduct VAT. One example, and it's very interesting, comes from the ABBA group. The ABBA from Sweden, the pop group that is very popular. And they said it recently in an interview that they use those odd clothes with big collars and a very strange outfit because of their accountants. Because their accountant said that they should buy these clothes because if they bought, let's say, a suit and a tie, this could be considered by the fiscal authority as a personal expense. So they would have to buy clothes that were only able to be used whenever performing for their fans. So that is a true story. So this states, the simple example states the difference among an acquisition of a good that generates VAT inputs and becomes deductible, and one that does not. So we need to analyze some cases before making this connection to human rights that is so important and is the reason why we are all here in this event. The ECJ, the European Court of Justice, has faced the VAT deduction problems a few times, and I'm going to bring here just one example. It was case 165 from 1986. There was a Dutch business that was dedicated to lending books to their customers. The customer used to pay a fee, and the book was delivered at their customer's home. And to deliver the book in the customer's home, the owner of the business paid the gas that was used by their employees, by his employees, in order to deliver the book to the reader at their home. So he deducted VAT that was within the receipts of the gas he paid for his employees. And the Dutch authorities said, no, you cannot deduct VAT here because you're not using it in the company's car. You're using this gas in your employee's car. And then the case went to the European Court of Justice, and the European Court of Justice ruled that even though the car belonged to the business employee, the fact that the gas was supplied in order to favor the business and in order to make possible a taxable event, the tax should be deducted, and he won the case before the ECJ. So we can conclude at this time that if the purchase of any input is taxed by VAT, and if the good or service acquired is related to the taxpayer's taxable supplies, the right of deduction is due. Well, what happens in Brazil? In Brazil, we have many problems regarding the right to deduct VAT. And I'm going to bring here just one problem. It was the case of the telecommunications companies and the right to deduct input VAT on the acquisition of electricity by telecommunication companies. We all know that without electricity, we're not able to talk on the phone. Maybe some people at Apple do not know that, since iPhone's battery doesn't last for more than 3 or 4 hours. But the fact is that we need electricity in order to perform the telecommunication service. Therefore, a legislation was passed in Brazil stating that from that moment on, only industries would be authorized to deduct input VAT in their acquisition of electricity. So, the Superior Court of Justice of Brazil, in a ruling that was 1.5 years ago, stated that for all purposes, telecommunications companies shall be considered in Brazil as industries. Industries of the 21st century, but industries, and therefore it should be recognized to them the right to deduct input VAT in their acquisitions of electricity. And why did they do that? They did that because without electricity you cannot perform the telecommunication service. Well, after these examples, we need to establish the connection with human rights. We all know when we need to recognize the right to deduct VAT, but is the refusal of the VAT deduction a breach of human rights? I understand that it is. And the European Court of Human Rights also understands this way. Because it has ruled in a case, Bovas versus Bulgaria, that the right to deduct VAT shall be observed by the fiscal authority, otherwise it is a breach to the right of property. And it understands that the VAT input is a possession in the terms of the protocol of the European Convention of Human Rights, and as a possession, it shall be protected by the human rights. Well, but I think that in this stage, linking the right to deduct VAT to the right of property is very easy. Maybe we need to go a step further, and at this time, at least the European Court of Human Rights hasn't gone that far. I personally understand that whenever you deny a taxable person the right to deduct input VAT, you are also discriminating this person and you are violating the principle of equality before law. After all, we need to remember that VAT is a tax on consumption, and whenever you deny the right to deduct input VAT, the price of the good or the service will be higher, and it will be more difficult for families to purchase that item, for families to use that service. So we create in the VAT the same problem that VAT was conceived to solve, the problem of the high tax burden on goods and services. And therefore, I understand and conclude, since my time is almost up, that the deduction of input VAT, yes, it can be defined as a human right, or at least encompassed by human rights, in the perspective of the right of property, but as well as in the perspective of equality before law and the principle of non-discrimination. The cheaper are the goods, the cheaper are the services, more people will have access to it, more people will have good quality of life. Thank you very much.